Greetings everyone, my name is Nicolò Brandizzi and together with Luca Iocchi and Davide Grossi, I'm the author of Reinforcement Lupus, Cooperation through Emergent Communication in the Werewolf social deduction game. In this video, I'll briefly present our work supported by these slides. We provide a formalization of a social deduction game as a structure made of three components. The first one is the number of opposing parties P. Each party has a number of players, M, that must coordinate with each other. Usually, in social deduction games, there is one party which is considered evil, while the other must cooperate in order to win the game. Next is the environment itself, S, which implements the game logic. It has the usual reinforcement learning settings, in which it takes as input a set of action and returns some rewards. Finally, we define a discrete set of possible game actions, A, and an unidirectional communication channel, Cij, B, intended to convey some information B between two players, I and J. Since our work focuses on reinforcement learning as a solution framework, we should give a little more insight on the action set. Given a policy pi, we define two possibilities regarding communication and actions. The first one arises when the communication needs to convey information disjoint from the action. In these cases, the agent will have two codependent policies, one to interpret the communication coming from other players, and one for the game action themselves. On the other hand, when the communication at time step t can be considered a description of the action to take at time step t+1, the channel can be embedded into the action space and regarded as a descriptive action. In such cases, only one policy is needed to interact with other agents. This is the choice we made for our methods, which will be described in the next slides. Now that we have a clear understanding of the problem, let us focus on the methods we use and specifically on the Werewolf game. So, the Werewolf game is a social deduction game modeling conflict between two groups in a partially known environment. In the game, the wolves know exactly the identity of each player, while the villagers are certain exclusively about their roles and the number of werewolves. The game is divided into two phases, night and day, interleaving each other. The game ends either when the villagers execute the last werewolf, or there is an even number of both roles. The latter case implies the wolves winning. As previously mentioned, we work with an action space with embedded communication. Indeed, an action is made of two distinct elements. The target is the first element of the action vector. Its purpose is to specify the actual choice of a player. The more players have the same target, the more likely it is to be killed. Differently, the signal vector is a modular vector used for communication. Modular in the sense that the user can decide its range and length before the start of the training phase. In our work, we train the villagers with a learnable policy while the werewolves stick to a static one. This choice was made in order to study emergent communication in a cooperative environment, but future work could also focus on the latter possibility. The static policies are three. The random one simply outputs a target at random. Unite is similar, but the random target is the same for all the werewolves. This allows the wolves to unidirectionally force their target choice on a naive set of villagers. Finally, the revenge one targets villagers who previously voted for a wolf if there are any. The trainable policy is Proximal Policy Optimization from 2017 paper by John Schulman, and here we show its objective function. Before presenting the results, we should introduce some metrics chosen in order to analyze the agent's learning. We chose the following four metrics. Will win. Since we only have two roles, we can focus on the ratio between werewolf and villagers' winnings. From this point onward, every instance of a winning ratio implicitly refers to the villagers. Sometimes, it becomes part of a complex strategy to vote for oneself, in order to deceive the other agents. For this reason, we report the number of times an agent votes for itself, normalized by the total number of agents. In order to get a good measure of how good the agents are at playing the game, The average number of days before a match ends is stated as a metric. Finally, as a cooperative measure, we introduce the accord ratio, which is the percentage of agents voting for the same target at execution time. In our work, we analyzed two different setups, one with 9 players and one with 21. In the 9-player settings, we report a slight increase in the villagers' winning rate, 4.4%, when there is no communication, 0 SL, against a completely random environment where the theoretical winning rate is 3.12%. On the other hand, with the addition of a single-bit communication channel, 1 SL to SR, we have an important gain on the villagers' winning rate. Precisely, when the Werewolf policy is the random one, the villagers are able to win almost 20% of the times, which is 4.5 times more than the previous condition and 6.5 times the theoretical winning rate. For the Unite policy, we see an increased coordination as pointed by the win wheel column. These results alone proves how even in the most disadvantaged settings, the introduction of a limited communication channel can greatly favor the final outcome. Finally, the revenge policy is the easiest to spot for a trained agent, reaching a winning rate of 40%. The motivation being the simplicity of the policy itself. That is, the werewolf cannot hide behind a purely random action anymore and are not strong enough to drive the majority of the votes towards a villager. Differently to what analyzed earlier, the 21 players, 21p, environment has more room for the villagers to win in a completely random setting, which is 11.6%. In accordance with the findings from the previous experiment, the bit communication, 9SL to SR, seems to perform better than the full-ranged one, both in terms of winning ratio and suicide. On the other hand, the second row performs worse than the no communication one, which can be attributed to an incorrect exploration of the environment. Indeed, every other setting with a communication channel has a higher winning rate than the one without. For these reasons, we believe this outcome to show how the shape of the communication channel can improve the agent's capacity to explore the environment, and thus should be further investigated. To conclude, in this paper we define a formalism for social deduction games, in which communication is an essential part for the game together with the allowed actions. On top of that, a general resolution framework based on reinforcement learning was defined and applied to the Werewolf social deduction game, by studying how various forms of communication influence the outcome of a match. As shown by the experimental results, the introduction of different forms of communication greatly increased the performance of the agents, the villagers. In particular, we observed that a Boolean signal range is preferred to an integer one. The reason for this is unclear, we speculate in nailing the duality of the roles of the game. Moreover, we found how much of a villager's winning rate is determined by the agents not voting for themselves, while keeping the accord value to a maximum. This translates into better coordination, which is possible only when there is a sufficient amount of communication present in the environment. Also, we notice that there is no linear map between the amount of communication permitted, SL and SR, and the overall performance. Indeed, there seems to be an optimal combination of the two, which depends mainly on the signal length. Thank you for your attention.